welcome to the Law Lab. Here, we dissect and unpack everything legal. My name is Jacqueline Opoku, and today we'll be having an interesting discussion on capacity to contract, which is a topic under contract law. So far, my colleague Aaron has taken you through nature and essence of contract law, offer and acceptance, and intention to create legal relations. Today we'll be focusing on capacity to contract, which is one of the formation of a contract. That means if you want to form a contract, there has to be an offer and acceptance. After having an offer and acceptance, there has to be an intention for you to create legal relations. That means that if anything occurs, if there is a breach or there is any misunderstanding, you are going to take it to court for the court to look at the contract you've entered into, whether or not it's supposed to be binding. But then today our concentration is on capacity. One may ask what capacity is. So when we are talking of capacity, it simply means the ability to do something. So if you are saying capacity to contract, that means the ability of a person to enter into a contract. In Ghana, we have the Contract Act, which governs contract law. But then there are three categories of persons that cannot enter into a contract, or even if they enter into a contract, is going to be void or voidable. So that means that in Ghana, everyone can enter into a contract except these three categories of persons. And they are 1, minors, 2, drunken persons or persons who are intoxicated, and 3, persons of unsound mind. But today, our focus will be on minors. That means we are focusing mainly on minors in the fact that minors cannot enter into a contract. And if they do enter into a contract, that contract will not be binding on the minor, but it will be binding on the adult party. So our outline for today, which is mainly on minors' capacity to enter into a contract, we'll be looking at the general rule in relation to the capacity of a minor to enter into a contract. We'll be looking at the exceptions to the general rule, and then we will look at when a minor enters into a contract and the minor performs his or her part, and the adult party does not perform his or her part, what happens or what the minor has available to him or her. So we'll start with the definition of who a minor is. In our lay sense, someone might think a minor is someone who is below 18 years because the Constitution of Ghana states that a person can only vote if he or she is 18 years and above. So we do believe that a person who is 18 years is an adult. But in contract law, we do not rely on the Constitution for the definition of who a minor is. This is because common law rule on who a minor is, or the age which common law has accepted, is 21 years. Until now, Ghana still relies on the common law rule that a minor is someone who is below the age of 21 years. So if you want to enter into a contract with someone, do not have it in mind that the person has to be 18 years and above, because the law is that a minor is someone who is below the age of 21 years. Okay, so after knowing who a minor is, we must know that there is a general rule that a minor who enters into a contract with an adult party, the contract is not binding on the minor, but it is binding on the adult party. That means that if Kofi, who is below the age of 21 years, enters into a contract with Amma, who is above the age of 21 years, who is deemed to be an adult, Kofi will not be bound by the contract, but then Amma will be bound by the contract. This is because Kofi is a minor, Amma is an adult. So we have to understand that the general rule for minors' capacity to enter into a contract is that it is not binding on the minor, but rather binding on the adult party. But there are various exceptions, and we'll be looking at the exceptions to this rule, because in law, to every general rule, there are exceptions. So when we look at the exceptions to this general rule, the first one is contracts for necessaries. So when a minor enters into a contract for necessaries, it is binding on the minor, but the minor has to pay reasonable amount for the contract. So then I've spoken about the fact that the minor has to pay reasonable price. But then what is a contract for necessaries? So contract for necessary means that you are entering into a contract which is suitable. Necessaries are goods which are suitable for the condition of life of a person in their actual requirement at the time of delivery. So at the time of delivery, you should know that when you are delivering the goods to the person should have needed it at that time. That is goods of necessary goods or goods of necessity. So when we look at Section 2(3) of the Sale of Goods Act of 1962, Act 137, it backs the definition of necessaries or contract for necessaries that when you are delivering the goods of necessary, at that very moment you delivered it to the person, it should have been the actual requirement which is suitable to the person's condition of life. So condition of life could be a person's status in life, how the person is living at the very moment the goods were delivered to him. So when a minor enters into a contract for necessaries, we have to consider that the very moment the goods were delivered to him or her, they were the goods that were for his actual requirement, like the goods that he required for the description he gave, everything he stated that I want these goods and this is how I want these goods to come out to me. So when you are delivering, the seller or the adult person is delivering the goods, it must suit the requirements given by the minor and it must suit the minor's condition of life. If it follows these requirements, then the minor will be required to pay a reasonable price. You may not understand, but if I use cases, you will get it. So in the case of Nash versus Inman, in that case, a university student who was below the age of 21 years ordered for waistcoats or fancy dresses. Let's say that. She ordered for fancy dresses. Meanwhile, at the very moment she ordered for it, when she was coming to school, her parents had already bought similar fancy dresses for her. And then the tailor or the person who delivered the goods was very much aware that the minor had these goods in abundance, but then still delivered it. So when the adult party sued, the court held that at the very moment the goods were delivered to the minor, she didn't need it because she had it in abundance, or she had those goods and then it was more than necessary for her. So at the very moment she ordered the goods, the clothing were not necessary for her at that moment because she had them in abundance. Do you get it? And then we have the case of Chapel versus Cooper. So in that case, a young person or a minor got married and then the husband died. So she was a widow. When the husband died, she ordered for a coffin to, have the funeral rites and bury the husband. But after the burial service and after the funeral service, she decided not to pay, and then the adult party sued. And this is what the court held. The court stated that although she was a minor who had entered into a contract, in the normal sense, it wouldn't have been binding on her, but then the coffin at that time was a necessary goods for her. This is because she needed it to bury her husband at the very moment. So at that condition where she ordered, her husband had died. And if she didn't get the coffin, she wouldn't be able to bury the husband. So that means the coffin became a necessary goods for her because at the very moment she needed it and it will suit her condition of life. There is another case of Peter versus Fleming. She was a son of a renowned person and he ordered for rings and fancy things at that moment. And when he came, he stated he didn't have enough money to pay and the adult party sued. The court stated that although he ordered for fancy rings, fancy clothes, fancy jewelries, he needed it because at his status in life, he could pay for those goods. Looking at the status of his parents, looking at his own status, he had the ability to pay for it. Hence, he needed to pay a reasonable price. So far, I have spoken about the exception to the general rule that when a minor enters into a contract, it is not binding on the minor, but rather binding on the adult party. And this first exception is contract for necessaries, which simply means that when you enter a contract for necessary and you're a minor, you are expected to pay a reasonable price, not the original price, but rather a reasonable price. And we must look at the condition you are and the requirements you gave out at the time you ordered for the goods. And when the goods were being delivered, were they up to the requirement or to your actual requirements that you had asked the adult party? The next exception is we will look at is a beneficial contract. A beneficial contract simply means a contract that will benefit the minor. So it means the minor is entering into a contract to receive instructions or training that will in turn help the minor to either earn a living or will be beneficial to his capacity in life. So when a minor enters into a beneficial contract and he decides not to pay or not to perform his part, the adult party can sue the minor through the minor's next friend, who can act through a lawyer, to enforce the contract against the minor. But then you must note that although beneficial contracts are binding on the minor, if the contract is read into or is read as a whole and there is any part of it that will benefit the adult party, then that contract cannot be enforced against the minor. I'll take it again. If a minor enters into a beneficial contract and you read the contract as a whole, and any part of the contract seems or looks like it is going to benefit the adult party, then that contract will not be binding or will not be enforceable against the minor. For example, Akosia enters into a contract to learn carpentry so that in future she can do carpentry works for her to be able to sustain her life. But then when she entered into the contract, let's say Madam Amma, who is teaching her the carpentry work, is always sending her, go and buy this, go and buy that, or pay me this before I teach you this part of the contract, or pay me this before I teach you parts of the carpentry or how to, cut the tree, the timber or anything, or how to saw the logs. When you look at this contract very well, although it is going to benefit Akosia in the long run, at the very moment, it is benefiting Amma because she is gaining benefit out of it. And Amma is an adult party who is not supposed to benefit from this contract. So if the court sits on the case, reads the contract and realizes that Amma, who is the adult party, is benefiting from the contract, then that contract, which is beneficial to the minor, will no longer be binding on the minor. That means Amma cannot sue Akosia to enforce the contract. In the case of Di Francisco versus Banu, she entered into a contract to learn how to dance. But then when the court read the contract into detail, they realized that the contract was benefiting the adult party because the adult party told the minor that he or she cannot get married up to a certain period of 7 years, and then she cannot enter into any contract. So first off, the contract looks harsh, or it is harsh, and also the adult party is also benefiting from it. So the case of Di Francisco supports the fact that if a minor enters into a beneficial contract and there is any part of the contract that will benefit the adult party, then the adult party cannot sue to enforce the contract against the minor. Another exception to the general rule is voidable contract. So when we say voidable contract, it simply means that the minor has entered into a contract in which the subject matter has a permanent interest or nature, and it gives rise to recurrent obligations. So it simply means that the contract the minor has entered into, it will continue up until he or she decides not to continue with the contract. So in simple words, voidable contract means that a minor will enter into a contract which the subject matter has a permanent interest, and then the interest will give rise to a recurrent or continuous obligation. So as I was saying, if a minor enters into a leasehold agreement, for example, she decides to rent a house, the renting of the house gives a permanent interest or is in a permanent nature. That means until her leasehold expires, she's going to continue to live in that house until her leasehold expires. So with that, she would have to pay rent. She would have to observe the necessary terms of agreement that she entered into with the landlord. So with this type of contract, the minor can either decide to repudiate the contract whilst he or she is still a minor, or whilst the minor attains age of majority. Within a reasonable time of attaining the age of majority, he or she is expected to repudiate the contract, or else the adult party can enforce that contract against the minor. So for example, Kofi, who is a minor, has entered into a leasehold agreement. In simple terms, he has decided to rent a house who from Ama. So Ama is the landlord, and Kofi, who is the minor, is now the tenant. Since Kofi knows that he's below the age of 21 years, he has decided he will not pay rent. And then when he attained the age of 21 years, he decided not to continue, thinking that since he's a minor, Ama cannot enforce the contract against him. When Ama decides to sue to enforce the contract will be binding on Kofi, because this is a voidable contract that gives rise to continuous obligation. And the law states that these types of contracts are binding on the minor. Hence, Kofi will be expected to pay the rent. Or if Kofi decides that I've attained the age of 21 years, but then I don't want to continue with this agreement, Kofi has to repudiate the contract. That means set aside the contract that exists between him and Ama within a reasonable time. And reasonable time here is based on the case, on the facts of the case. That means there is no law governing the reasonable time. So it's a fact-based issue. So Kofi has to repudiate within attaining the age of 21 years, a reasonable time. If he doesn't, it will be binding on him and he will be expected to perform his part. So if he does not perform his part, the adult party, which is Ama, can sue to enforce the contract against Kofi. Also, if Kofi attains the age of majority or whilst he's still a minor, he decides to repudiate the contract, he is supposed to note that any obligations or any obligations that were incurred before him repudiating the contract or setting aside the contract, he will still be liable to perform these obligations. That means that obligations that arose before the repudiation will still be binding on him, but then the obligations that will incur after him setting aside the contract will not be binding on him. So we have a classical case of Carter versus Silber. In this case, it was a lease agreement he entered into, and he didn't set aside the contract after attaining the age of majority. So the court stated that he was still bound by the contract, because although he entered into the contract whilst he was a minor, he didn't set aside the contract after attaining majority within a reasonable time. Okay, so far we have discussed what capacity to contract is, which is the ability to enter into a contract, and then the persons who cannot enter into a contract. And I've stated that there are 3 categories of persons who cannot enter into a contract in Ghana. So these persons, we've known them to be minors, drunken persons, or persons of unsound mind. And we are focusing on minors, and we've stated that minors are persons who are below the age of 21 years as governed by common law. So with the age of minor, it's governed by only common law and no other statute or no other law. And we have looked at the general rule that when a minor enters into a contract with an adult party, the contract is not binding or enforceable against the minor, but rather enforceable or binding on the adult party. But then there are exceptions to this general rule. And we've looked at contract for necessaries, which contracts which a minor enters into that he needs those contracts to sustain his condition in life. We've looked at the cases of Peter versus Fleming. We've looked at the cases of Nash versus Eman to support what contracts of necessaries are, and that in contracts for necessaries, the minor is expected to pay a reasonable price when he or she is sued. And we've looked at beneficial contracts, which is a contract which benefits the minor. So he enters into a contract to receive either apprenticeship or instructions which later in life will suit him, or he will use those training or skills to help sustain his capacity in life. And we looked at the case of D. Francisco versus Barnum, stating that the contract should solely benefit the minor and not the adult party. And finally, we looked at the case, the other exception, which are voidable contracts, which we stated that they give rise to continuous obligation, and it is an interest in a permanent nature. So the subject matter is a permanent interest, and then the obligations that comes to it are continuous. So we looked at the case of Carter versus Silver. But we've already looked at beneficial contracts, and someone might confuse himself with beneficial contracts with trading contract. Beneficial contract, the minor is receiving instructions. That means it's either a training or apprenticeship. But with trading contract, which is another exception to the rule, but it supports the general rule. It's not an exception, sorry. It supports the general rule. With trading contract, the minor enters into a contract of trade. That means to buy and sell. When a minor enters into this contract, it is not binding on the minor. That means the adult party cannot sue to enforce the contract against the minor. For example, A, who is a minor, decides that he's entering into a trade contract with B, who's an adult party, to deliver goods to B. But then B paid A, who is the minor party, and the minor decided not to deliver the goods. In this situation, the adult party has no remedy. That means the adult party cannot sue to enforce the contract. This is because the law is against minors trading. So if an adult party enters into a trading contract with a minor, basically the law will protect the minor, and then the contract will be unenforceable against the minor. So in the case of Cohen versus Neild, in that case, the minor party entered into an agreement to deliver hay to the adult party, and then he took the money but never delivered them, and the adult party sued. The court stated that this is a trading contract, and a trading contract is not binding or enforceable against the minor. So mind you, beneficial contracts are binding on the minor, whilst trading contracts are not binding on the minor. There are situations where a minor, knowing that he or she is a minor and having a fair idea that if he or she enters into a contract, it will not be binding on him, will therefore decide that I'm going to enter into a contract with an adult party, but then I'm going to lie about my age, or I'm going to misrepresent my age to the adult party, because the minor usually knows that the adult party will not enter into a contract with him, the minor, because the adult party is very much aware that it is not binding on the minor. So what would the minor do? He or she will go to the adult party and go and misrepresent his or her age. What does the law say? So at common law, the law states that when a minor enters into a contract with an adult party and the minor misrepresents his age to the adult party, whether or not the adult party is aware, the contract is still not binding on the minor. This is unfair, but then that's what the law says. That is common law. But then equity comes in to save the day. Equity states that even if the adult party didn't know that the minor came to misrepresent his age to him, if the minor entered into a contract with the adult party and misrepresented his age to the adult party, the goods that were delivered to the minor will still be recoverable by the adult party only if the adult party can identify the goods, and that the goods that he or she can identify must still be in the minor's possession. That means for the adult party to recover these goods that he or she delivered to the minor whilst the minor misrepresented his age, the goods must be identifiable. That means it must be goods that can be seen or can be stated that these are the goods I delivered to the minor and that they are still in his possession. Therefore, although equity is coming in to save the day, if the goods are not in the minor's possession and the minor has resold them to another party, the adult party cannot recover these goods. So although equity has come to save the day, there are still limitations to how the adult party can recover the goods or the contract he entered into with the minor. So we've come to realize that minors are not bound by contracts that they've entered into, although there are exceptions. Hence, when we are going to school, we always need loans. Most times, our parents cannot afford our fees, so we decide that we'll go for loan. A minor who goes for loan from an adult party to pay certain things or to buy goods are not recoverable. The money that he went for, the loan that he went for from the adult party cannot recover the money under common law. So common law states that if an adult party gives out loan to a minor, the adult party cannot recover the money. Once again, equity comes in to save the day, stating that if the minor goes for loan from the adult party and the minor use the loan or part of the loan to buy necessaries or goods of necessity, then the adult party can recover the money or the goods. For example, Amma, who is a minor, enters into a loan contract with Kofi that I want a loan of 2,000 cedis. And Amma uses the loan to buy a laptop, the 2,000 cedis to buy a laptop. We have to look at whether or not at the very moment Amma bought the laptop, did she need it? So if Amma needed it, that means it becomes a necessity or is a goods of necessity. That means Amma has to give this laptop to the adult party. In simple terms, if Amma bought something that she didn't need it at the time or think goods that were extravagant or were not necessary for her, the adult party cannot recover these goods. We've realized that when university students in Ghana start university, sometimes they may not have money. So the government decided that they are going to support these students. It will not be a scholarship, it will be a loan. So we have the student loan scheme of 1992 PNDC law, PNDC law 276, which states that when a minor goes for any loan under the student loan scheme, he or she will be assumed to be 21 years and above. That means that the lawmakers realize that most minors will take advantage, go for the loan, and will not pay. Therefore, if the government is taking to court or the government takes the minor to court to sue to recover the money, the government will not get the money. That means there will be a lot of loans that people are not going to pay. Already, we don't have enough money and we are giving out loans and people are not paying. So the government or the lawmakers sat down and realized that if we do not couch the law in such a way that will benefit the government to recover their money, it will benefit the minor and we will not be able to recover our money. So PNDC law 276 states that if a minor goes for a student loan under a student loan scheme, whether or not the person is 21 years, the person will be expected to pay the loan. That means the government can sue to recover the loan that the minor took from under the student loan scheme. So far, we have discussed the general rule for minors who enter into a contract. We've looked at the exceptions and we are very much vexed in it. But then there are situations where the minor will enter into a contract and that the contract that the minor will enter, the minor will perform his or her part and the other party will decide not to perform their part. What are the remedies available to the minor? So the minor cannot sue because he or she does not have the capacity to bring an action in court to either ask for specific performance, which is usually the remedy available to the minor. So the minor will then sue through his or her next friend or guardian ad litem, who will act through a lawyer to sue to ask the court that the minor has performed his part of the contract. Therefore, the court should help the minor to make the adult party perform his or her part. So Amma has entered into a contract with Abena. Abena is an adult party. Amma is a minor. Amma has performed her part. Abena has decided, oh, Amma is a child, so what can Amma do? I'll not perform my part. Amma cannot sue because Amma does not have the capacity. The only thing Amma can do is she must sue through her next friend or guardian ad litem. Her next friend could be her parents, could be someone who is older than her, either her siblings who are older than her uncle, or any person older than her. And that person cannot go to court on their own. They must act through a lawyer. And then the lawyer will plead the court that, please, the minor has performed his or her part, hence the adult party must also perform their part. This is what is known as specific performance as a remedy available to the minor for performing his or her part. So we are ending this discussion by recapping what we've done so far. We've done capacity to enter into a contract. We've looked at the persons who cannot enter into a contract. And then we focused on a minor, that a minor is someone who is below the age of 21 years. And that if he or she enters into a contract, it is not binding on him. But there are exceptions to these general rules. We've looked at contract for necessaries, voidable contracts, beneficial contracts, which are exceptions to these rules. We've looked at the fact that trading contracts are also not binding on the minor. We've also looked at the fact that when a minor misrepresents his age to an adult party, the common law states that it is not binding on the minor, or the contract cannot be enforced by the adult party against the minor. But then equity states that the minor will be made to recover the goods that are identifiable and are in his possession to the adult party. And then we've also looked at the fact that when a minor enters into a loan contract, he or she is not mandated to pay under common law, but then equity states that if the minor uses the loan money to purchase necessaries, then he or she will be expected to give those necessaries to the adult party. And we've looked at the fact that in Ghana, under the student loan scheme, the minor will be treated as a person who is 21 years or above if the person goes for a student loan in order for the government to recover the loan given to the minor. And we've looked at situations where the minor performs his part and the adult party decides not to. The minor has the remedy of specific performance, and he or she must sue through his next friend, who must act through a lawyer in order to be granted this remedy of specific performance. Thank you for joining this wonderful discussion on capacity to contract. And I hope if you have any question, you will leave it under the comment section and we will reply you. Thank you and have a nice evening.